The sky was a sheet of iron-gray clouds as the sound of clashing steel and war cries echoed across the fields surrounding Stamford Bridge. The air carried the sharp tang of blood and the bitter cold of a late September morning. On one side of the Derwent River, Harold Godwinson's English army, fresh from their forced march north, prepared to deliver the killing blow to the invaders. On the other side, Harald Hardrada's Norwegian forces, battered and unarmored, scrambled to regroup after their unexpected ambush. Between them stood a single wooden bridge and a lone Viking. The battle had erupted without warning, catching Hardrada's forces off guard. Days earlier, they had celebrated a decisive victory at Fulford, their confidence bolstered by their triumph over the northern English earls. With their enemies defeated, the Norwegians believed the north was theirs to claim. Many had left their armor behind, expecting a peaceful acceptance of their rule. But Harold Godwinson had moved with unprecedented speed, marching his army over 300 kilometers in less than 4 days. The Norwegians, still recovering from their victory, had no time to prepare. Chaos erupted as Harold's army descended upon them. The Norwegians scrambled to form a defensive line, but without their armor and with their forces scattered, they were vulnerable. Harald Hardrada, a towering figure with a reputation as one of the greatest warriors of his age, tried to rally his men. His voice boomed across the battlefield, calling for order amidst the chaos. Yet even he could see the writing on the wall. The English advance was relentless, their superior numbers and organization overwhelming the disoriented Norwegians. "Fall back to the river!" Hardrada bellowed, his sword glinting in the morning light as he hacked his way through the enemy ranks. "Hold the bridge at all costs!" The retreat was frantic, a desperate scramble to reach the relative safety of the far side of the Derwent. Soldiers shouted to one another, urging their comrades to move faster as arrows rained down around them. It was in this chaos that the lone Viking made his stand. He had seen the peril his comrades faced, the impossibility of holding their position without a delay. And so, without hesitation, he stepped forward onto the bridge, his broad frame blocking the narrow crossing. This decision was not born of mere impulse, but of a deeply ingrained sense of duty. The lone Viking had fought in countless battles under Hardrada's command, and he knew the importance of sacrifice for the greater good. As he turned to face the advancing English soldiers, his mind was clear, his resolve unwavering. He would hold the bridge no matter the cost. The Viking was massive, his shoulders broad like a ship's hull and his hands gripping an enormous battle axe with an ease that belied its weight. His name was lost to time, but his deeds on that day would echo through the ages. He was a berserker, one of those rare warriors who could summon a frenzy in battle that made them seem inhuman. As his comrades retreated across the bridge to regroup on higher ground, he planted himself in the center of the narrow crossing. The English soldiers hesitated as they approached. They had heard the stories of berserkers, warriors who fought with the strength of 10 men, their minds lost to rage and their bodies impervious to pain. This man looked the part. His chest was bare, marked with scars that crisscrossed his flesh like a map of past battles. Around his waist hung a leather pouch, and his eyes burned with an intensity that froze lesser men in their tracks. With a deliberate motion, the Viking reached into his pouch and pulled out a small piece of dried flugsvamp, fly agaric, the fabled mushroom of the berserkers. He bit into it, his teeth crunching the flesh of the fungus as he chewed slowly. The taste was bitter, earthy, and pungent, but he didn't flinch. His comrades had seen him perform this ritual before. They knew what was coming. As the effects of the mushroom began to seep into his bloodstream, the Viking's body shuddered. His breathing grew heavier, his muscles twitching as if electrified. Foam began to form at the corners of his mouth, his jaws grinding together in a frenzy of raw energy. He spat the froth onto the ground, glaring at the English soldiers who now stared at him in a mixture of horror and awe. He let out a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to shake the very bridge beneath his feet. It was as if some ancient beast had taken hold of him, and the English soldiers faltered. The first to approach him was a young warrior, eager to prove his mettle. The Viking moved with startling speed, his axe sweeping in a deadly arc. The blade caught the young man at the waist, cutting through flesh and bone as easily as it would a stalk of wheat. The body crumpled to the ground, split in two, and the Viking let out another roar, his bloodlust rising with each kill. One by one, the English soldiers charged, hoping to overwhelm him with their numbers. But the narrowness of the bridge worked in the Vikings' favor. They could only approach him one at a time, and he cut them down with brutal efficiency. His axe flashed like lightning, slicing through shields and helms, leaving a growing pile of bodies in his wake. The wood of the bridge grew slick with blood, and still the Vikings stood, unyielding. From the English side, Harold Godwinson watched in frustration. The lone warrior was buying precious time for the Norwegian forces to regroup on the far side of the river. His archers tried to pick him off, but the Vikings' constant movement and the press of bodies made it impossible to land a clean shot. Harold's men tried to rush him en masse, but the narrow bridge forced them into a bottleneck, and they were cut down like sheep before a wolf. The Vikings' frenzy showed no signs of abating. The Flugsvamp coursing through his veins dulled his sense of pain and heightened his senses. He could hear the faintest creak of leather, the softest footfall, and he struck with unerring precision. His body was a whirlwind of destruction, his axe an extension of his will. The foam at his mouth grew thicker, his eyes wild and unblinking. He looked less like a man and more like a demon pulled from the depths of some forgotten hell. Finally, Harold's men resorted to desperate measures. A group of soldiers slipped away from the main force and waded into the river, their armor weighing them down as they struggled against the current. They floated beneath the bridge, hidden from the Vikings' view. One of them, armed with a long spear, positioned himself directly beneath the warrior. He waited, timing his strike carefully, and then drove the spear upward through the wooden planks. The point of the spear found its mark, piercing the Viking's unprotected abdomen. He let out a strangled gasp, his body convulsing as the weapon was twisted and pulled free. Blood poured from the wound, staining the wooden planks beneath his feet. For a moment, he faltered, his grip on the axe loosening. But even in his final moments, he refused to fall. With a final surge of strength, the Viking swung his axe one last time, cleaving the nearest English soldier in two before dropping to his knees. His breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurring as the blood loss took its toll. He looked up at the sky, the gray clouds swirling above him, and a faint smile crossed his lips. He had done his duty. His comrades were safe. The English soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to approach. The Viking's body swayed, his strength finally giving out. He toppled forward, his axe slipping from his grasp and clattering to the blood-soaked bridge. For a moment, there was silence, the only sound the rushing of the river below. Harold Godwinson's men surged across the bridge, their path now clear. But the delay had cost them dearly. On the far side of the river, Harold Hardrada's forces had regrouped and prepared their defenses. Though the battle raged on, the lone Viking's sacrifice had turned the tide, allowing his comrades a fighting chance. The legend of the Viking on the bridge would live on, passed down through the generations as a testament to the unyielding spirit of a warrior who stood against impossible odds. His name may have been forgotten, but his deeds were etched into the annals of history, a reminder of the power of courage and the fury of a berserker in full rage.